You must love podcasts if you're listening to this. Do you want to start your own one or you already have one? Then follow Smarter Podcasting to get expert advice from me, Niall Mackay, the podcast guy. Since 2019, we've worked with over 40 podcasters, produced over 700 episodes, and helped many podcasts get to the top of the Apple Podcast charts. And right now, I'm offering you a professional edit for just $27. Click the link in the show notes. Welcome to another episode of Smarter Podcasting. My name is Niall Mackay, the podcast guy, and I'm here to help you build your community and connect with your audience. I started my first podcast in 2019, and I don't say this lightly, it literally changed my life. I'm here to help other podcasters on their podcast journey to help them build their community and connect with their audience. I now work with people around the world to help them on their podcasting journey, create an amazing show, and connect with their audience. I do that through my blog, through coaching, consulting, my online course, and this podcast right here. In this episode, you're going to be joined by an industry veteran. He began his career back in 2008, editing podcasts and creating on-demand audio for radio stations. In 2016, he founded a media hosting company that served millions of listeners across the world. He then sold that company in 2016 and founded Origin. He now hosts The Helpful Podcaster, which empowers entrepreneurs to create a long-lasting and meaningful relationship with their listeners. My guest today is someone I look up to and respect so much in the industry. It's Mark Steadman from Origin. I've been working with Mark now for the last 6 months, and I look up to this guy so much for his knowledge, his passion, and his enthusiasm for the podcasting industry. And so I'm so excited to be able to share his knowledge with you today. You're going to be learning some crucial information. Everything is about the listener. Mark's going to share with us what that means for everything that you do, from setting your goals, creating artwork, and hosting your show. Hey, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. What we're going to be talking about is, I think, so important. And it comes up time and time again. And there's so many topics that we're going to cover. There's so many topics that have been covered, and there's so many topics to cover. But at the end of the day, the number one thing that comes up time and time again, and really is the number one answer, is making great content. That should be your number one. And I think there's so much out there to learn. It can be so overwhelming. And it can be easy to forget that your number one thing as a podcaster is to just make great content. And I think any independent podcaster who has found success probably did that more than all the myriad of other things that we're told to do to grow our podcast. They just made great content and then they were successful. And what we're going to talk about today is how to make great content. And one of the most important things, I love this point of view, is putting the listener first. And it seems so obvious, but it's one of these things, I guess, that not everybody does. So give me an example of what would it mean to not put the listener first? What would be some examples of somebody completely disregarding the listener?
So one of the best examples, I don't hear or see this as much now, so I don't know if it's still being done, but it was very much being done for a few years, is people would start their show on Anchor, or Spotify for podcasters it is now, and they would open with a 2-minute ad for Anchor, because Anchor promised them that they would earn a bit of money for every download that they got past a certain number. And that's a bad listener experience. It's also a bad podcaster experience, because that money doesn't really materialize. And what it's really doing is cutting your show off at the knees before it's had a chance to grow, because most people will start on something like Anchor because it's free and then maybe graduate to something else. And they will graduate to something else if their show is doing well and if it's attracting listeners and if people are really enjoying it. But if you start right from the beginning with a new show and the first thing you do is advertise for a service that doesn't really have your best interests at heart, but the first thing you do is you ask the listener to do something else, you're not really adding value. You're not building trust. You're not saying to the listener, come on in, like, this is what we're going to do. Let's spend time together. That is what we're trying to do here. Whether you're making a comedy podcast, an entertainment podcast, a news show, whether you're a business and you want someone to take a particular action, you've got to start by thinking about who they are and why they should take that action, why they should spend time with you, because that's what they're doing. They are putting you in their ears and they're walking around, they're doing the dishes, they're having a bath, they're walking the dog. You are along for the ride with them. So as much as it starts, or as much as the content is a big part of it, there's actually a load of stuff around it that can sound like a lot of thought, but really it just comes down to, is this something the listener cares about? And so when you think about planning episodes, I take this to a degree where when I'm writing, I mean, I finished an episode this week and it's all about podcasting. And the episode was about podcast artwork. And I literally saw the people that I had in mind, the actual people, the people I could name and have spoken to that this episode is for. And when you do that, you are targeting the people who are more likely to want to listen. Because if I'm really hyper-focused and really targeted about this particular person, this is what they care about, this is what they have time for, this is what they don't have time for, this is what I want to help them with, then that makes it far more easy to spread that kind of message, because chances are they know someone who's like that as well. And they will say, oh, actually, you're at a similar point in your journey. You've got this question about podcast artwork or wherever. You should listen to this episode because it's speaking directly to them. So it comes from starting, putting the listener first with everything that you do, because not just out of pure altruism, but, there's part of it, but because good podcasting is about generously communicating and showing up for your listener, and being able to deliver them really good value. And so when you can do that from the outset, the rest of it kind of actually becomes a little bit easier, because you're not having to second guess. You're not having to think too much. You're actually just going, what do they care about? And so that's sort of in a nutshell my rambling answer.
No, that's absolutely great. And it's like you say, so it's almost a state of mind that you have to be in. And then if you have that state of mind, everything comes from that. And one thing you said there really resonated with me, and it's something that I believe in. It's respecting the listener's time. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm also a stand-up comedian, so I do stand-up comedy, obviously. And I do the same. I apply the same logic when I do stand-up comedy. You have to respect the audience. So if you're not prepared, if you have to look at your notes, if you're going to say some sort of cliche, or basically, like, you just have to be up there and you have to respect the fact that the audience came out to see you, and you're there for the audience. And so it's the same with podcasting. And I've said this from the very beginning. It's insane to me still. I absolutely love this medium. It blows my mind that somebody will sit and listen to something that you've produced, even if it's one person, something that you've produced for an hour or so. That person, like you mentioned, is giving up an hour of their day, whether they're at the gym, doing the dishes, in the car. They're committing to listen to you. And there's a podcaster I know, obviously not going to name him. He puts zero effort in to his podcast, apart from making it. He's made hundreds of episodes, great guests, and great interviews, the ones that I have listened to. The audio quality is awful. Like, it's his phone in the middle of a room. I've tried to tell him to use Descript, turn on the studio sound, do something, do anything. He does nothing. And I've never said it to his face, but I want to be like, you are disrespecting the listener. You want a listener to give up an hour of their time to listen to this tinny, shoddy audio? So I think that's a great point you made, that respect that the listener is giving you their time.
And we have to, because, well, for one reason, it's such a crowded market. It's such a crowded space. We can talk about niching down as we that's probably the word or phrase of 2023, and that will get you
and 22 and 21 and
24. It's just but as much as that's good, and that's good advice, it's no, like, if you essentially hold the listener in contempt, if you don't have that time for them, if you think, it doesn't really matter, they don't care, it's not that they necessarily care, but they notice that absence. And so my whole thing is about building trust. My whole thing, what I do, is about building trust, building long-lasting relationships with listeners, because the work that I do is helping primarily solopreneurs make their podcasts. And so if you want someone to take action, if you want someone to work with you, that action could be anything. Could be from, booking a call with you, to taking some sort of climate action, joining a protest, like whatever it is. If it's something that you want someone to do, that starts with building that trust. And if you sound like you're halfway across the room, you are almost literally holding the listener at arm's length. Whereas if you bring them in, and you can do this with the help of studio sound, you can also do this by just getting nice and close to your microphone. Like, you don't need a microphone. You just have to be up close to it. And when we do those things, we nestle in the listener's ear. We create this little bubble, this little cocoon where it's just you and the listener, and that's where the magic happens. And it doesn't take much more than just thinking about that and just having that care. Like, if you can go in and really care about the listener. I mean, a slight sidetrack on this is I'm hugely fanatical about using the word listener in the singular when we talk about and to a particular person. It's something that comes from radio. It's an old school radio thing, and it absolutely works. It's worked for over 100 years because people don't listen to the radio, well, slightly differently, but people don't really listen to podcasts, certainly, as a group. Yes, I know you can have listening parties and stuff, but people are listening as a single person, as a single unit. They are not guys. They are not everyone. And when you do that, it's another way of holding the listener at arm's length by saying, hey guys, welcome everyone. You're suddenly making me one of many, one of a faceless number. Whereas if you actually talk to me as a single person, hey, how you doing? Really glad that you've joined me today. I'd love to get your feedback on this thing. Drop me an email. When you actually communicate with me as a single human being, then you start to build that trust. You start to build this parasocial relationship where I, as your listener, feel like I know you. I don't really, but I feel like I know you. And that is what is a precursor to building that sort of that trustful relationship. So as much as it's, getting the content right, it's also thinking a little bit about the presentation. And all of this stuff is learnable, and it's all manageable, and it's okay if you don't get this stuff right from the beginning. But if you care about the person on the other end of the phone or the earbuds, then it's worth doing, and it's worth learning.
There's three really powerful things that you said there. So one, I hadn't thought about the physicality of, if you have your microphone across the room and you're listening to this, you're just listening to someone having a conversation in a room, which is not what a podcast is. It's not the magic of podcasting. So that physicality of being close to the microphone, being in someone's ear, that's what you like. That's what you want. And I've not really ever equated the physical nature of being close to the microphone to the physical nature of that experience. So that's incredible. Number two, amazing insight there. Using the singular, and it's got me thinking, do I do that? And I probably don't. I probably say what you just said there, like you guys, or I don't know if I say listeners much, but I definitely don't do it in the singular like that. And there is so much to learn from radio. I've done it in a previous podcast where I finished with the same segment every episode. And I literally took that from radio just as a radio fan. And I realized my favorite morning radio show, I've been listening to it for 10 years now, have the same segment every day. And I laugh every day, and I listen to it every day, and I love it. And it was like a light bulb moment when I started my podcast. I was like, that must work. If they do that every day, and they've been doing it for years, I'm going to do the same. So I finished my episodes with the same 6 questions per season, and then every season it would change, but it was the same finale on every episode. And then the last thing, the key takeaway there from what you just said was, the fact that you can, and I tell people this all the time, you can always improve, you can always change, you can get better. Like what you've just told me there will make me better. Like I'm now going to make sure when I'm doing future podcasts, I'm going to talk to that one listener. I'm going to make sure my language is correct. And I've been doing this for a few years now, and I'm working with clients, coaching people, but I always tell people you have to learn all the time, because there is so much opportunity to learn, but the biggest thing is just get started, right? Like, that's why I say to people, just get started. Like, if I hadn't started when I did, I wouldn't be in the position now to learn what I'm still learning. You have to keep going and keep building that knowledge. So putting the listener first, what else would you tell somebody? Like, this is already so key, such key information. How else do you put the listener first?
Start with, it's a bit, maybe a bit cliche, but it's worth doing, is thinking about a listener persona. There are tools that will help you do this. And there's also one at thepodcastcanvas.com, incidentally. But what this is about is trying to, so you might call it a persona, you might call it an avatar. It's creating a person with a name, putting a face to that name, thinking about how old they are, thinking about, you can do some sort of demographics if it's useful, but what's much more useful is the psychographics. So thinking about what they care about, who influences them, who do they influence, where do they go for conversations, what kind of things do they talk about, what keeps them up at night, what are their goals and values. And then from that, you can start to come up with some quotes, sort of things in their own language that they might say to describe themselves. And then write a sort of quick summative statement, just like one sentence that describes this person as it's relevant to your show. Once you have that idea, and it's really great when you can base it on real people that you know. Once you have that, that's the person you talk to. That's the person that you can almost have. You know, people have talked about like pinning photos to their monitors and stuff. Like, I don't do that, but people absolutely can have just like taken a photo and stick it to your monitor. And so when you're talking to them, that's the person you're talking to. It's huge. It's so effective. So making that start of thinking exactly who is this for. So the show I do now, I thought about doing it when I was just walking home one day, and I just thought, what would be really interesting is if I made a show that was essentially for my clients. I'll make it public and anybody can listen to it, but I'm going to make it for my clients because I know that I attract a certain type of client, and so the likelihood that that stuff will resonate with more people, or there is a higher likelihood, because I'm thinking about, well, like Dan, what does Dan care about? If I'm going off on one about some new microphone or whatever, he's already got his mic. He's happy with that mic. He doesn't need a new mic. Does he care about the new, whether Twitter or Mastodon is? No, he doesn't care about that stuff. What he cares about is another way that we can use our microphone, use mic technique, think about how we do our intros and outros so that we've got the call to action right. Those are the things that he might care more about. And so I can start to write my stuff and come up with my content thinking about those things, thinking about what those individuals care about. So start from that listener persona and work forwards from there.
I wanted to share with you about one of my favorite affiliate partners, and that is Fiverr. I've been using Fiverr for years for everything from ordering YouTube thumbnails to keyword research, writing podcast articles, even to Canva designs and thumbnails and more. So whether you're a budding entrepreneur, a podcaster, or anyone in between, Fiverr has got you covered. It really is the go-to platform if you want to find freelancers offering a massive range of services to help you on any project. Maybe you need a stunning new logo or just a short animation. Whatever you need, you can find it on Fiverr. What I love the most is how easy Fiverr makes it to connect with talented freelancers from around the world, all at prices that will fit whatever your budget is. Plus, with Fiverr's secure payment system, you can trust that your transactions are safe and secure. No dodgy people you meet on Facebook groups that disappear with your money and never give you what you want. What, that's only happened to me? As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you use the link and at no extra cost to you. As an affiliate partner, I will get a small commission if you click my link and you buy something, all at no extra cost to you. And best of all, you will be directly supporting the making of this podcast that you're listening to for free, but it is not free to make. So why wait? Head over to somewhere that you've probably never been before. It's called the show notes. So whatever app you're listening in, if it's Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything at all, head to the show notes, click on my special link, and then you can browse thousands of gigs ready to help you with your next project. And to that listener who's listening right now, there might be one person, let's call him Dan, who's listening. Let's call him Neil, because this is me I'm talking to right now. He thinks that's too hard. I just want to make a podcast. I don't know what a listener persona is. I don't know how to develop one. I just want to make a podcast. And so on this show, I've been talking a lot about AI, and I use AI a lot. And because it does what I can do better and faster. So actually, just a couple of weeks ago, I used ChatGPT. I've trained it, fed it the information about my show and about my podcast and about what I do. So you tell it all a bit about you. And I said, create a listener persona for this target audience. And because it knows what a persona is or what an avatar is, I can't remember the exact language I used, either avatar or listener persona. It literally told me the gender, the age, their background, their challenges, and what they wanted out of a podcast. And then it was a female was the original one. And I said, tell me about a male. And it gave me a male persona, which was similar, but slightly different. And those questions that you just said there as well, like, you know, what are they thinking? What are their challenges? I'm going to go back and then feed those questions in. And so what ChatGPT wrote was not something that I couldn't have written, but it would have probably taken me an hour or two of thinking and brainstorming and coming up with it. And so some people listening as well might be thinking, I'm not using ChatGPT, I'm not using AI. Yeah, it's a cheat, but it makes everything quicker and faster, and then you can tailor it to your needs as well. So that would be my big tip. If you are that listener who's thinking that's too hard to create a listener persona, I don't know how to do that, I don't have time to do that, there are tools available. And you mentioned Podcast Canvas.
Yeah, so the Podcast Canvas, that's something that I'm working on. And that's an ebook and a Notion template as well that guides you through that entire process. So if it does feel sort of difficult or icky, then there is a sort of a guided process for that. So thepodcastcanvas.com is where I would gently invite you to go. But what I would really pick up on there, the question I have is, and maybe this is because I'm older, and I certainly wasn't like this when I was younger. I was very much like, I'd come up with a podcast idea in a day and start with episode 1 and just go for it. My question to you or to anyone else who's thinking, I don't have time for this, is what's the rush, and what is it that you actually want to achieve from your podcast? And so if it's about getting your message out there, or if it's just about having fun and turning up to the mic and having a laugh, then absolutely do that, go for it. And you can sort of build your parachute on the way down. You can, just get started and go. But if there's a bit more of a purpose behind it, if there's a bit more of a goal behind it about whether it's helping you grow your influence or whatever, you really need to, I think you really need to actually step back. So, there's a chap that I work with at the moment. He's a business consultant, and he has this phrase that he uses that comes from I believe it was Abraham Lincoln, who said, if I had 4 hours to chop down a tree, I'd spend the first 3 sharpening the axe. Because when you stop and you spend time actually, rather than doing, if you stop and you spend time to sharpen the axe, what you're doing there is you're getting really, really, really targeted and really thinking about, when we get into an episode, what are we doing? What's the takeaways? How can we deliver value? Bang in, bang out. And everything becomes a lot more streamlined and easier. And that's the thing. It's as much as, yes, we can hit record and we can go, there's actually a lot more effort on the back end then to then think about the marketing, because if you've just sort of created your show, you've then got to think, where's this going to go? Am I just going to blast it on social media? Am I going to go to different forums? What am I actually going to do? Whereas if you stop and you spend the time to think, well, this is where this person hangs out. I know this because I sat and I did the work. I don't think ChatGPT can help that much, because what ChatGPT is really good at is predicting what word to put next. It's not really necessary, and so what it's going to give you is something generic, because it's a probability engine. That's what ChatGPT is. It's literally, its job is to get some input and then produce some input where it is predicting what is the most probable word to put next in this sentence. And so what that ends up with is something fairly bland and generic. Whereas if you actually sit and spend a couple of hours even doing this yourself, you'll come up with something that's much more unique, that's much more, you can't be more unique, but that is unique and that is much more tied to what you want to achieve, the people that you want to work with, the people that you want to influence, the people that you want to spend time with. ChatGPT can't help you with that. That's the work that it's worth doing on your own because it makes the rest of the process actually go a lot smoother. End of lecture.
No, I absolutely love it. And it's so I'm the person that you mentioned there. So I just like to do. I don't sharpen the axe. I'd probably rather spend 4 hours with a blunt axe trying to get it down. And that's my, there's two types of people. I talk about this often. There's the people who have paralysis by analysis, where they'll analyze it so much they'll do nothing. I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, where I don't analyze it at all and just get it done, and it's maybe not as best. So for that listener, be more like Mark, somewhere in the middle. Yeah. I think for ChatGPT, as I kind of said, it speeds it up for me. It's something, and if you're like me and maybe you're like, I'm not going to do this because it's too difficult. I don't know how to do it. I don't have the time. Those are all excuses that I make that we're all going to make. Put it into ChatGPT. As I said, it's never going to be perfect. It's then going to give you an idea to be like, oh, this is what it's going to give you, that template that then you can then take and delve deeper. So don't think that it's just going to give you the answer. And that's what I talk a lot about with AI is it will get you to somewhere, but it's always going to need a human touch to it.
What I would recommend is get ChatGPT to give you the questions that you should ask. Rather than trying to answer them, maybe a prompt could be something like, I need to write a listener persona for my podcast. It's about this. This is kind of the people that I want to work with. It could be, I want to work with solopreneurs or expats or whatever. And so those are the people I want to work with. I'm building a listener persona. What questions should I ask? What things should I be thinking about? And then get ChatGPT to actually give you the things to think about. Because I absolutely think you need to do that thinking yourself. But you can definitely get ChatGPT. If you're stuck and you don't know, I don't know the first thing about this, then definitely getting ChatGPT to say, give me some questions to ask. Prompt me to think about it. And then you could then try and feed those answers back in and see what comes out. But I would definitely do the thinking yourself, but use ChatGPT to help you with those prompts.
So tell me, what are your other methods for putting the listener first? Because I feel like there's probably so many. What are maybe some of the smaller nuances or more obvious wins?
So things like titles and show notes, and even things like artwork. So I'll start with the artwork first because it's just fresh in my mind. One of the points I was making in my episode today was people often want to put their company logo in their artwork, or they want to put a subtitle and a name that, their name and stuff. And when you stop and you think about someone completely new to you and to your brand or to your line of work, what do they need to know? What do they need to see? They need to see something that's attractive and interesting and, bright and vibrant or mysterious and intriguing. And so what that usually is a small bit of text and some color, that could be a photo. What they don't need at that point is your name. They don't need a subtitle because that stuff is actually visible on screen elsewhere. The host's name is visible. There is a description. And then when it comes to the description, whether it's per episode or for the podcast itself, think about the fact that when someone's browsing a list of episodes or a list of podcasts, they see the artwork on the left, they see the text on the right, the sort of maybe the host name and then the name of the show. And then they've got maybe 2-3 lines of a description. That's not a lot. So if your show is called How to Grow a More Ecologically Friendly Business with Jeff Businessman, right? That's the name of your podcast. What we so often see is the description then says, welcome to I can't even remember the name, but welcome to How to Grow a Better Ecological Business with your host, Jeff Businessman. On this episode,
you remember that?
On this episode, we, or this is the podcast where we, and so by the time you've done all that, you've run out of space. And so what I like to do is in my show notes and in my description, for either for an episode or for the podcast as a whole is take that first sentence and really pick something that is going to set up tension. What we want to do is grab the listener's attention. We don't need to say something controversial for the sake of it, but absolutely get their attention, make them go, "Ooh, okay, interesting." So that could be, I don't know, eating vegan is actually far cheaper than you might think. I'm pulling that out of my backside. It may be true, I don't know. But it's so what we're doing there is we're starting our description. The first thing after the title, the first thing that reader, because they're not yet a listener, the first thing they're going to see is a statement. They're going to see the position that this episode is taking. And at that point, they can then hit the little more button and go and find out a little bit more. And so the next sentence we describe, like we relieve that tension, or we describe how the episode is going to relieve that tension. You know, it turns out eating vegan can save you so many pounds a month. That's what this person discovered when they switched their diet to a meat-free diet. And then you start to do that. So that's your description. And then the title, again, it's maximizing the space. We don't need the podcast name. We don't need the episode, the word episode. We don't need an episode number. There's arguments back and forth for whether you include an episode number. I personally don't think you need to, but there's absolutely room for that. But you need a title, again, that's going to, in the language that the listener already uses in their head, something that's going to intrigue them, something that's going to solve a problem, something that, again, is going to set up tension. So thinking about, again, if I think about business or entrepreneurial podcasts or anything with that kind of purpose behind it, when you start by thinking, what is a question that the listener is likely to search for? Because that can be really powerful then, because if you start using those kinds of words, that increases the likelihood that your stuff might show up. Combine that with a bit of niching and you can create a title that is a bit more Googleable, that actually points to a problem. If you're interviewing a guest, yes, you want to honor that guest because you want their name to be in there, but it doesn't need to be in the title. It can be later on in the description. You can have a photo in your artwork, and that's fine. But again, put in the listener first, thinking about no one's browsing podcasts to go, I wonder what Mark Steadman thinks. They're going, what can Mark Steadman tell me? Well, they're not even thinking that. They're not at all thinking that. They're going, I've got a question about podcasting. I want to increase my downloads or whatever. Again, where this gets tricky is that we are talking about putting the listener first. That's not something that someone's searching for, because that's not a problem they believe they have. But if we can think about the struggle that they're facing, if we can think about what is a difficulty that is in their life at the moment, in as much as I've been producing episodes for a year and no one seems to be engaging with them. Okay, well, it might be because you've got a 3-minute ad for Anchor at the beginning of your episode. So put the listener first, and that's where you can sort of edge in. And so everything from the title, the artwork, the description, it's all trying to go right the way back and think about how is this going to be found by someone who doesn't know you. And so that's sort of where it all comes from.
It's something that you've touched on something there that I've started doing recently, which probably without consciously realizing that I'm putting the listener first. But what I've started to do more and more recently is think about my own podcasting habits and thinking about, so my main podcast that I started that's pretty well known now here in Vietnam, I'm not really producing any new content for that. I haven't been producing new content for a year. I did an announcement because I was focusing on this podcast and other ventures. I'm still getting more downloads right now than I ever have. And I looked at it, and the vast majority, because I do put out the odd episode every now and again, but what I'm doing is putting out either pod swaps, I call them. So I swap with one of my other podcasts or a pod past where I'll pull, because my archive is so big now, I'll pull an episode out from the past. And one of the fun things is taking an old episode from the beginning and then increasing the sound quality, because the beginning it wasn't that great, and now repurposing it, like digitally remastered like Star Wars. And so I'll do one of them a month or something. So now over 80% of my downloads come from my back catalog. And that was what really sparked for me thinking, well, how do I select a podcast? And I think about it even now. So what you said there was what someone looking for. And I still do it when I'm listening to other podcasts about podcasting. I have something in my head that maybe I want to know more about something. So I scroll down and find that title that's like, oh, that's what I want to learn about. I don't go through, I went, and I don't know if other podcasters have the same notion. I used to think that my listeners listened to the newest episode. They waited for the new episode to come out and they were listening in sequential order. And for me, a big mindset was realize that, like, I don't think most of them do. Because even my number one super fan, I spoke to him, I was like, oh, did you hear the new episode? And he's like, oh, I'm a few behind. I haven't caught up yet. And you realize that, oh, like people, that's not how people consume podcasts. And with the numbering thing that you mentioned, I only think numbers are important if you're making a narrative series. And I was listening to a narrative series recently, which didn't number their podcasts. And it was infuriating because I was like, I actually don't know which episode is number one, which episode is number two. That's when it's important. But if you're just making podcasts that are evergreen or there's no sequential merit, for me, I wouldn't add the numbers to them.
There's one of the arguments is if you've got a large back catalogue, being able to say, go back to episode 93 and we talked about this, which is fine. But that's what we have links for, is that you can just link to that episode in your show notes. You know, you say, go back to episode 93, a link is in the show notes or whatever, and then they can go straight to that episode rather than having to scroll back. But, you know, I can absolutely see why having it in there, you know, can sort of make sense. And it gets a little bit complicated now with the fact that Apple have just changed their ruling on how they deal with it.
Yeah. Well, I had considered numbering them, and I'll be honest, I would never remember what episode to refer to. I wouldn't be like, oh, go back to... I've heard Pat Flynn do it, and I'm like, how do you remember that was episode 264? Like,
preparation. It's all everyone's cheating. You know, it's all meant to sound off the cuff, but they've got the stuff. I do it the same. Like, I can't remember, but I'll go back and I'll look through Transistor. Because they aren't numbered on my website, but they are numbered in Transistor, my hosting provider. So I can just go, I know what it was roughly titled, and there it is, and I can pick that one.
Yeah. And just touching there, you mentioned about the change in Apple. Explain what that is for anyone.
Yeah, so recently, and some of this stuff changes so much, so who knows what this will be. But right now, as of mid-May 2023, Apple have removed episode numbers from the interface, from the Apple Podcasts app, the interface there. So for many years, it used to go, people just put their episode numbers in their title, sometimes with the word episode and then the number, fine. And then after a while, Apple noticed, like, well, lots of people doing this. That's probably wasted space. We could do something about that. Like, if we got people to put in an episode number in a specific field in their hosting dashboard, if they actually put the episode number in a particular field and then removed the episode text from their title, we could actually display that in a nice little area. And so we could provide more space for the title, and we could just have the episode number somewhere else, and that would be lovely. And I think from what I was hearing, I think this was on a recent episode of Buzzcast, which is BuzzFeed's podcast. I think they were talking about the fact, or they're because Apple never tell us why they make these changes, but it sounds like people weren't really adopting it, and so, or some were, but many weren't, and so they just thought, we may as well just go back, because otherwise, if not everyone's really on board, and even other apps, like, I'm quite surprised that it hasn't been adopted by that many other apps, or the apps that feed off the Apple Podcasts catalog, whether it's Overcast or Castro or whatever. I don't see them implementing it. I don't think they did, and anyone can, because it's all in the feed for your podcast. And so right now, as of May 2023, episode numbers are now removed from the Apple Podcasts app, and so it's then a question of, what do you do about it? And one quick piece of advice from other people is to put the episode number, if you need it, put it at the end of your episode title rather than at the beginning. Because so at least it's still there if you want it to be there. Because again, to a new listener, to someone who's going through and just seeing your episode in a bunch of others, the episode number means nothing. It only really means something once you're really invested and into that catalog. So all this thinking, like, it all comes back to putting the listener first. I think it's fair enough for me saying, do all these things. I think that thinking takes time, and I think it it takes a bit of experience, and it takes but it is just worth trying to filter the decisions you make, or the choices that you make, or the advice that you give, or that you get, filtering that through the lens of how does this affect someone who's never heard of me before? What's useful? What do they need? And usually that means paring stuff down. It usually means we actually don't need a lot of this stuff. And less is more and all that stuff. So like any kind of advice you get or anything that you read, filter it through that prism of how does it affect the listener?
And I think that really feeds into the fact that you should never have a podcast about anything and everything. And we could do a whole episode on that, because you're not doing it for that listener.
To that, I would say, I think this is the thing with a lot of this stuff is absolutely do that. If that's what you want to do that. But you can't have the same expectations of growth and of all those, other things, success, whatever you call it, if you don't think about these things. So if you just want to turn the mic on and hit go, absolutely go do that. Like, no, there's no podcast police. Have fun. Like, if you enjoy that process, and whether you're just doing it for yourself or you've got some mates who enjoy it, like I do that. I have a show. It's not really a show. I blab into my microphone for a bit, and then I upload it somewhere, and it's free. And those of my mates that are interested in that, of what's going on in my life, they can listen to it, and that's great. And there's no, I've just turned the mic on and I go. The difference of what we're talking about is if you actually want to achieve something from your podcast, that is more than just the good feeling that you get from doing it. If there's something else that you want, then it's worth really thinking about these things.
You're much nicer than me, because if I see one more person with a podcast about everything and anything, I'm about to break the internet. But Mark, this has been absolutely incredible. I cannot thank you enough for coming on Smarter Podcasting. Really, really love learning from you. I love working with you, and your knowledge is so great. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Smarter Podcasting. I hope you found our discussion valuable and gained some new insights to apply to your own podcasting journey. I want to extend a special thank you to my guest, Mark Steadman from Origin, for taking the time to join us and to share his expertise. I truly appreciate his contribution to not only this episode, but the podcasting industry as a whole. I'd love to hear what you thought of this episode and how you will use this in your own podcast. Now, I know right now you're probably driving or doing the dishes or mowing the lawn and don't have a spare hand, but when you do get a chance, please go to Instagram or Facebook, whichever one you use more, and go to 7 Million Bikes Podcast. I'm giving you permission, slide into my DMs and let me know what you thought. If you want to start your own podcast and learn more about creating exceptional content, connecting with your audience and growing your podcast, then I invite you to join my comprehensive course for podcast beginners, How to Start Your Podcast, Get Your Voice Out, and Share Your Story. In this course, I share with you my years of experience in podcasting, producing, editing, and hosting podcasts, along with proven techniques and strategies to help you succeed. From planning and recording to editing and promoting, I'll guide you through every step of the process. If you want to join the students that have already successfully started their podcast and getting thousands of downloads already, including Ian Painton's You Don't Know Vietnam and Dee's Never Forget What They Did, then visit 7millionbikes.com and enroll in the course today. I can't wait to see you there and help you on your podcasting journey. If you already have a podcast and you still have some questions, then you can also slide into my DMs and ask away. I promise I will personally get back to you. Once again, thank you for being part of this podcasting community. I am here to help you on your podcasting journey. Your support means the world to me. So stay tuned for more exciting episodes packed with valuable content and inspiring guests. If you do enjoy this, then please make sure to subscribe, follow, rate, review, all of those good things that can help this podcast build and share this information with more people. I'm Niall Mackay, the podcast guy and founder of 7 Million Bikes Podcast. Thank you for listening, and until next time, happy podcasting.
Hi, my name is Sal Jeffries. I run the Mindset, Mood and Movement podcasts. I've been working with Neil at 7 Million Bikes for the whole of this year, literally from the start of my podcast to date. And I want to say a couple of things. So when we record the podcast, sometimes there are things that I need tweaking. There could be edits or clips. It's really simple. I give those instructions to Neil, he gets it sorted. There's sometimes a sound level differences between the guest mic and mine. Again, that's all sorted so the outcome is a really balanced sound. And also if there are issues with voice, little kind of sound interruptions, all those things that can distract a listener, Neil knows exactly what to do, cleans it up. The end result, highly professional, beautiful sounding podcast without distraction. That's exactly what I want. I know my listeners do. So if you're interested in having that level of podcast and that kind of quality, Neil is a great guy and I highly recommend you speak to him.